Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. One thing we can be chronically guilty of in the emergency services is not raising our head above our siloed thinking and learning from other professionals. We know from business and technology and leadership lessons in general that the answer can lie in taking inspiration from other professions to craft new ways of thinking about our work. So my guest today is an incredible leader from our military sector. Brigadier Chris Murray was enlisted as a trooper in the Royal Tank Regiment in Catterick in 1974, before completing a potential officer's course and subsequent selection for Sandhurst. He was commissioned in the Royal Corps of Transport in 1955, serving in the UK, Germany, Northern Ireland and Cyprus, and also got his knees brown serving with the Gurkha Transport Regiment in Hong Kong and Brunei. He attended the Army Staff Course at Camberley in 1988. He deployed on Gulf War I on Operation GRANBY, with headquarters 1st Armoured Division with particular responsibility for artillery, ammunition, logistics. He then commanded 19 Squadron RCT. In Minden, supporting 11 Armoured Brigade, he served as a major and as a lieutenant colonel, was in the newly formed ACE Rapid Reaction Corps. He then commanded 8 Artillery Support Regiment RLC in Catterick from July 95 to January 98. Following command, he was appointed briefly as a member of the directing staff of the new Joint Services Command and Staff College at Bracknell, where he gained a Master's from King's College London. On promotion to Colonel in November 98, he was appointed as the Commander Royal Logistic Corps Territorial Army at Grantham. He was awarded a CBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2002 for being a thoroughly nice bloke, in his own words. He took up the post as Director of Defence, Storage and Distribution in April 2002, which was a bit of a culture shock, having been a trucker all of his career and faced with having to outload the depot for Gulf War II. He was then promoted to Brigadier and commanded 143 West Midlands Brigade in December 2003. He left in 2006 to close the UK campaign in Bosnia and to be the last commander of the British forces and commander of the multinational task force. This was a job usually filled by infanteers, but on this occasion they needed a one-star general who could count. He took up the appointment of Director Royal Logistic Corps in July 2007 for 3 privileged years as the head of family for over 16,000 army logisticians. He finally left the army in 2010, completing a 15-year virtually unbroken period in senior command and a total of 36 years of great fun service with soldiers and exhausted liver. Following retirement from the army, his civilian job for 10 years was the Vice President of Agility Logistics, Defence and Government Services. He built that business from scratch, providing support for the UK MOD in the UK, Middle East and Afghanistan, including disposing of 10,000 sea containers of equipment to enable the campaign drawdown. We are going to go into so many areas of Chris's career today, and it is an absolute pleasure to welcome him to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you on the other side. Chris, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
I am very well, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sparing time out of your busy life away from family and your work to spend some time with us today. We first interacted with each other at an emergency services show through esteemed colleague, lovely gentleman, Simon Hunter. But as with so many fascinating people that I meet, there tends to be a much larger story behind why I find myself in a room with them. And you were, within about 60 seconds, I went, oh God, I'm talking to one of those really experienced individuals. Because you never quite, and this probably is somewhere to start, like, you never know who you stood in front of. And this is something, perhaps in your military background, I was raised, I still call people sir and stuff, and I get told off for it in my services. But there's this aspect of respect, and there's this aspect of that maybe is a nice place for us to start. But if you give us a little whistle-stop tour of who you are and what you did in a past life, and then maybe we'll kick it off after that.
Perfect. And it was great to meet you too. And just for your listeners, Pete, you are one of the most infectious guys I've met who can, grab somebody, capture their attention, and then within a moment, you can get people to open up to you and want to then come and talk to you. So I'm only here because of the impression you made on me briefly that day.
Thank you, sir.
I grew up in North London in a council house. Joined the British Army at 17. Was lucky enough to catch the attention of people who thought I could make it as a potential officer. So I'd been a trooper in the Royal Tank Regiment, and then went and passed the Army Officer Selection process and went to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Got commissioned, said I would stop doing it when I stopped enjoying it, Pete, really. Mentally, I thought I'd do about 5 years and left the regular army 36 years later.
That's a really interesting thing to be able to say, because some people, certainly in the public sector, get this aspect of the golden handcuffs where they begrudgingly carry on doing something, perhaps especially in the military as well, they can get like indoctrinated or what's the word I'm looking for? They kind of get conditioned to staying inside this thing for so long. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome aspect for some people. But there is a great number of others that really have very, very long, enjoyable and fulfilling careers in these types of things. But that has kind of changed in the past. Not that people don't still enjoy it, but what I mean is it seems to be a tendency of shorter careers. Like you said there, you had the intention perhaps of coming and doing 5 years and then just found continual challenge and progress perhaps.
Yeah, look, there's a lot in there. I think first of all, I wasn't even aware that the army really had a pension scheme until I got quite senior.
No one cares about pensions until they're in their mid-30s.
No, exactly.
I'm supposed to, I was paying into this thing, haven't I?
So it wasn't really until I was a brigadier in the British Army, and I was they were looking to change the pension scheme, that I got a briefing of what my pension might be worth. So I didn't join the army for the money, and I didn't stay in it because of the money. And to be honest, Pete, I think the army's just a bit too difficult to be in it if you aren't really committed to it, right? It's, there are some jobs you think, hey, look, I could spin this out for another 6 or 8, 10 years. But to be honest, it's so tough.
You almost don't want deadwood as well. Like, you don't want people hanging around. And I would say that the public services are similar. I always say people don't join for the income, they join for the outcome, as corny as that might sound. Because you feel, or I romantically do, you feel as though you're part of something bigger, you feel as though you're serving a purpose, there's that camaraderie aspect to it. It ticks a lot more, if we look at the old Maslow hierarchy of needs, it ticks a few more boxes other than the fundamentals of income and food and sleep and all that jazz.
Yeah. And as I say, I think it's too tricky to be in. It's not that it wasn't massive fun. It absolutely was. But the impact on your family, I was married for, and still am, to the same woman, but for 30 for 30 years. So I was 30 years married in the army, so 6 years single and then 30 years married. I made my wife move 17 times. Pete. So, this, so it's just too tricky to just hang on in there. Service is a concept that was probably quite a strong emotion at the time I joined the army. Later on, service isn't something that resonates necessarily with younger people, and people don't necessarily do anything for a long time. So to sustain a career in the army was quite a tough gig to do.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Do you think there's an aspect that's really valuable in that service? That we had an officer on from, I believe it's Germany, but I believe they do this in other locations still, where they have that mandatory service, for want of a better description, and they can do it in a public service. So, for example, a lot of people there did do it in the fire service, or you could do it in the military, or you could do it in the police or something like that. But it almost, it sounds horrible, not to say that people that don't do it aren't good citizens, but it kind of makes good citizens. It kind of helps you get a little bit of character building. It helps you get a bit of a holistic view on the world. It helps you understand what's good etiquette and interacting with other individuals. Teaches a bit of self-admin and care. We obviously haven't done that in the UK for 30 plus years, probably. When was mandatory service last in force? Do you remember? I don't even remember. But
late 50s, I think, Pete, to be honest.
That's what I mean.
National service.
And strange, because I think there was a lot of values. I mean, there was a lot of negative connotations to it. I'm sure I'm romantic in one side of the coin. But I think there's a lot of value in people engaging in public service.
I think when I became quite senior, I'd spend a lot of time with the public, either explaining what the Army was doing, hosting the Army presentation team. And probably the most common question people would have for me is, did I think that national service would be a valuable thing?
Really?
And broadly my answer was this, Pete, it would probably be a valuable thing for the nation, but it wouldn't be a valuable thing for the Army, right?
Okay.
So, valuable thing for the nation in that people have to do something which is not about themselves. So there's an element of contributing to society. And if you join defence, you then get imbued with the core values of defence. Discipline, integrity, self-respect,
yes.
all of those things.
For a lot of people, they're just punchlines now, though, is the problem.
Yeah.
Very few people really have a conceptual understanding of what that means to them.
Yeah, but actually, it doesn't take too long. So I ran a huge reserve organisation for about 3.5 years. I had 5,000 reserves in it. I could take somebody off the street, and in 2 weeks' time, I knew that I had captured them as somebody who understood the core values of being a soldier, and that basically that it was about team before self. Now, in the fire service, you absolutely get that, right? You deploy in a 5-6 man crew into something, you're absolutely reliant on your mates. And I can generally get that into somebody.
There's no single seat of fire engines. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So you said you got coined, for officer training, or you were tapped on the shoulder, or you were recognised or identified.
Yeah.
Your terminology. What does that look like in terms of identifying leaders for you? And what did you thought you demonstrated in retrospect? What do you think it was that was identified within you? And I'm sure which you've probably identified in many others over the years.
That's a really good question. I think I was. I'm surprised that they recognised it in me, Pete, to be honest.
Okay.
So I was 17 and a half, 18-year-old schoolboy, hadn't been to university. I ended up with. Later, I ended up with a master's degree in the Army, but I was a non-graduate. But the Army officer selection process is pretty good at seeing the potential for leadership and whether they can fan that into a flame. So I think they want to know that you're doing it for the right reasons, that you understand that it's all about the people that you're going to lead. You're only as good as the soldiers you command. They want to understand that you will be clearly fit enough and able enough to do it and have enough oxygen left to come up with a plan when everybody else is knackered.
On the chin straps,
but that your integrity is there, that your core values are right, that you will get up every morning, with a burning desire to take care of your soldiers, that you can communicate. Have you got the vision to see the plan? Can you then communicate that plan? And can you get soldiers to trust you, right? So
that's a great point.
Proper shooting wars tend to bring this into sharp relief, Pete. I remember on the eve of Gulf War One, before we went through the breach into Iraq, my overriding feeling was, I hope I don't let my people down tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow could be a big day. Actually, wasn't that tough. But if the moment comes, will I be found wanting? Right? And then on a number, I was lucky enough to command soldiers at every rank, from second lieutenant to brigadier general in the British Army, from as few as 45 to as many as 16,000. But what happens is, there comes a day, and normally when you're more junior, where you've got to motivate these people standing in front of you to potentially go and do something that's really quite tough, right? And there's an unlimited liability contract here. I may have to ask them to lay down their lives, right? And so you see these eyes boring into you, which is, I hope the boss doesn't squander my life tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Once more into the breach.
Yeah.
You're hoping they are not making, irresponsible decisions, or perhaps they even know they've made a mistake. But that's perhaps a great question I'd love to ask, is the common mistakes that first-time leaders make. Because when I say that there, some people are willing to die on their sword because they don't want to admit they got something wrong, is sometimes a tendency I see with first-time leaders. What did you tend to notice were perhaps common errors? And the reason I asked the question is to, tip the hat to those in new leadership positions. I know certainly in the military, but I can speak certainly for the fire service as well. We're going through a tremendous amount of promotion at the minute. Masses of people are retiring. Their time has come. They have done their service, and people are being promoted very quickly. And I have concern they don't have good mentors. They have access to resources, most definitely. And mentors is a loose term, because for me, many of my mentors are guests of the podcast or people I've listened to. I don't think you ever have to have even met certain mentors. You can have people mentor you by their actions. And it's the reason I wanted to ask you, because you've operated at every single level of leadership, really. When you got to those positions where you were guiding and coaching and mentoring perhaps new leaders, what were some of those common mistakes that you made some of them make? Or you saw some of them make, sorry.
Look, that's a really good question. I think perhaps one of the differences for the fire service is everybody starts off at the bottom. And so by the time you get not pushed, but by the time you arrive in a leadership position, there's a really good chance that you're professionally on top of the job that you've done before,
yes.
Right? And in some ways, it's the same with the police, although they've got a bit of a fast track system.
We're entering into that now. Sorry to interrupt. So we're doing direct entry now. So people will come up at station manager and above. So that's perhaps a great framework to continue as well. Thank you. Sorry.
So, great. Look, the British Army, though, you've got this professional officer corps, which then has potentially very young people leading very experienced people. And I remember I'd had my 19th birthday on operations in Cyprus, where it was shortly after the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, and we were doing some pretty gritty humanitarian stuff, and I was amongst the youngest in this troop of 45 that I was leading.
Okay.
And so, first of all, I think the soldiers gave me a degree of credit for being trained differently. So I'd been trained at Sandhurst. It's an international brand, so I think they accepted if it came to straight, and this was in a Logistic regiment, right? But I had been trained at Sandhurst as an infantry officer, so I think the soldiers thought if it gets a bit tricky, at least the boss has got more infantry training than most of us.
Okay.
But also, the training is such that you're in a troop and you're the commander, but there's a staff sergeant and a sergeant there with you, Pete. And in the nicest way, anyone who walks in on day one and as a second lieutenant and starts to indicate how things work around here is going to find out that that's not very clever.
Absolutely.
And what happens is you are technically the troop commander on day one, but you gradually take command, right? So that happens over a period of time where eventually everything's fine, and then normally in some difficult circumstance, some senior NCO grabs you by the sleeve and says, "Sir, you're on," meaning, right, this is your moment now. This is your moment to shine.
Okay.
So I think the advice I later gave to people when I was selecting people to command my soldiers, but then chatting to every bunch of people as they set off on their command opportunities at their command of 40 odd, their command of 120 odd, their command of 600 odd. I give them a whole bunch of Chris Murray's top 10 tips for command, right? But, one of them is, look, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so let's try and use them in that proportion to start off with. Listen to understand, not to reply, right? But then also remember, you are only as good as the soldiers that you command.
Okay. And
there's that lovely expression. The reason I can see so far is I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So I've got, and the more senior you get, you have to rely on subject matter experts, right? So I was a brigadier commander, British forces in Bosnia, closing the operation for the UK government. And I've got a lot of people working for me, but I've got some real experts. There's no point me trying to second guess the senior ammunition warrant officer, the fuels person, the infantry commanding officer of his battalion. They all know more about their thing than I do. But oh, by the way, I'm still in charge. I'm still responsible. I'm responsible for the whole plan. And my knowledge base is 3 millimeters deep and 25 miles wide. But I employ people whose knowledge base is 2 foot wide and 9 miles deep. And I rely on them to bring their professional bit to the party.
Today's podcast is powered by our partner Lifelines and their revolutionary approach to functional hydration. Just like in firefighting, water is essential for body function, but studies show more than 80% of firefighters are dehydrated. A 25-year study findings from the National Institute of Health showed poor hydration to be linked to early aging and chronic disease, and even mild dehydration results in significant negative impact outcomes including headaches, exhaustion, rapid pulse, irritability, and poor cognitive function. A study conducted by Yale University showed that participants who were just 1% dehydrated had a 12% increase in errors when performing tasks that required cognitive flexibility. In addition, dehydration is shown to worsen mood and attitude, contribute to confusion and poor decision making, and negatively affect memory and judgment. In other words, you really don't want your incident commander, firefighter, or for that matter any first responder on a critical scene to be even slightly dehydrated. Mild dehydration occurs when a person is just 1.5% dehydrated, a condition that does not even trigger the thirst response in most people. So just imagine how quickly a firefighter or any first responder can and does become dehydrated in their day-to-day duties, which is why I address my hydration first thing every day with Lifelines. Go into the notes for this episode and specifically check out Lifelines Hydro Fuel and Hydro OG by clicking in the notes for the podcast for a clean energy solution designed for those who demand more from their day. Now back to the show. But that comes to a very difficult thing when people have come from a sphere of comfort where they know the thing very well, and that is a bit of a hiding place for what is required for true leadership capabilities and how to manage subject matter experts beneath you, for want of a better description, if that makes sense.
No, very, yeah. Well, that echoes all the things I was saying before. I think there is a slight difference in the army context. And I used to say to the commanders that I was briefing, commanders command and advisors advise, right?
Okay.
So I think you are drawing on all of this professional information, but actually, as the commander, you take responsibility for the delivery of the mission, the plan, the whatever it is. And just every now and again, some of that advice you're going to get, whilst coming at you in really good faith, isn't necessarily, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to be very careful when you're ignoring it. But as the commander, occasionally you have to command and temper that advice. And I'll give you one small example.
Please.
So the Army's got a lot of lawyers, and you would be very cautious about ignoring legal advice. And sometimes that legal advice is there to protect you, and especially if we're talking about rules of engagement and things of that nature. But in the disciplinary world, on occasions I've listened to that legal advice and then decided to do something else and explain myself to the lawyer. Here is the disciplinary effect that I want to happen as a result of this, and I'm going to achieve that through this mechanism rather than following your advice. I thank you for your advice, and I know you're not happy. Please make a note that you told me that this was not what you wanted. So I just...
What drove you to decisions like that, though? Because that is a bold decision, and that will no doubt have cost certain people who have made similar decisions, may have cost them their careers. And the reason I ask this is because I see people wave policies at people as a way to manage them. And I think if there's ever a piece of paper sat between you and I, then our relationship has failed. I have failed as your leader. The fact that I need to wave this policy in front of you, the fact we are even joined by a member of human resources or someone else, I don't like that. And it used to be a frustration of some of my managers who managed me, that I didn't know many of the... Well, I knew the broad strokes of a lot of stuff, but I didn't know the detail of some of the disciplinary aspects because I preferred to manage things differently myself. But I think there's a strength in that. I think, and of course I would say that I have my own bias, but what led you to manage things differently?
I think it's worth saying that certainly at the time I was serving, and still today, we empower officers in command with extraordinary powers. So I had the powers of detention for soldiers. I could send a soldier to jail for 28 days. I could apply for extended powers and have them sent away for 60 days. I could remand them for court-martial. I had extraordinary powers, and when I became more senior as a brigadier, I was also the appropriate superior authority and could decide on all sorts of things. I think one of the and I don't want you to think that commanders go around ignoring advice. They really don't. No. Yeah,
we're not winging it. No,
we're not winging it. We are taking that advice, and especially in areas where deep specialism is required. Right? As I say, don't second guess the ammunition warrant officer about whether it's a good idea to store white phosphorus with HE in a certain bunker, right? So that we don't want to wing that one. But in the disciplinary environment, sometimes the system will grind quite slowly, Pete. Back in the day, and in this particular place, there was a training establishment that was in my command, and one of the young junior NCOs had acted highly inappropriately, and the system wanted to take him to court-martial over it, which would have taken probably about a year.
Yeah.
I wanted to have an immediate impact in the unit, so everybody in the unit had seen that it happened and then seen this person effectively removed and punished.
That's a great point, because as a leader, you're there to protect the standard as well. And people can very quickly fill in the blanks and go, oh, they're clearly doing nothing about it. Look, he's back at work. Jesus Christ, no one cares.
And then he gets court-martialed a year later, and people have almost forgotten what it was
They've
about.
all forgotten.
Right?
Yeah.
Half the units turned over.
What you permit, you promote, isn't it? That's what they always used to get told.
Yeah. So in my case, this was, thank you for the advice. I'm going to exercise my own summary judicial powers, and I'm going to direct this to happen, and the impact will be in 2 days' time, and everybody will get it. So this is this was for the wider understanding of example and things of that nature.
That's a really, really strong lesson, and it's something a lot of leaders I see doing less these days. They tend to pander, sounds disrespectful, but they take the word of HR and lawyers and everything like that, but they're not specialists in psychology and behaviour, in command and things like that. So yes, acknowledging and appreciating their knowledge base. I wanted to ask you about some of the work you had done during your deployment. So obviously you referenced the Gulf War. I know you have done a myriad of other adventures across your career. Adventures is probably the wrong term to be using for it. But I wanted to ask you about this character building aspect of the exposure that people get through a career in the military, because that's something people used to romanticize and say how much they would benefit from joining the military, travel the world and stuff like that. But I don't think it's always the case that people take the same benefits or the same outcomes as they might anticipate when they hear about all that lovely travel.
Again, lots in there. And a quick reminder, I didn't answer your last question properly about national service.
Close the loop on national service for me.
Good for the country, almost certainly, to get people to go and do something, and even if they only do it for a year or something. Most people who did national service wouldn't have volunteered to have done it, but look back with great fondness on their time in national service, and the comradeship and the mateship and then doing something for the greater good. And we had come up through the Second World War generation that bled into the national service generation, where there was a higher calling, right? This was defence of the nation, rolling into the Cold War, that this was an important thing to do. It's not a good thing now for the British Army. The British Army is small. It is highly professional, very well equipped. And the thing about conscription, Pete, is you end up with a large number of poorly trained people.
Yeah.
And that's fine if you're happy to have a large army that's not very good at its day job. And you only have to contrast Russian conscripts going into Ukraine February last, poorly trained, poorly led, poorly briefed, versus meeting people who understood the moral component of fighting power, were fighting for their homeland, were very well trained and very well briefed. And so, as we used to say, the moral to the physical is there's three to one. You get 3 times more effort of having people who are who understand what they're doing and want to be there.
Yeah.
So I think that closes that down. If that's useful.
100%.
And just to close the other door, guidance to young leaders. Don't think that you have to rush every decision. Don't be afraid to take some advice and to take a moment. And remember that you have to take the people in front of you with you. So it's, if you can just have a conversation with the more senior folk before you get to do something, unless it's instinctive and you're under fire. But more often than not, you've got a bit of time to work these things out. You don't have to rush, and you've been sent there to take care of the people in your team, right? Wake up with a burning desire every morning to make their lives better. And if you do that, they'll trust you, and then you can go and move mountains. I've now forgotten the previous question.
No, that's okay. I was recalling from your from our conversations prior to this that you'd actually done some work with the Gurkha regiments as well.
Sure.
We I've had several interactions with members of the Gurkha community. Never abroad, unfortunately, all that had visited the UK. But I found their way of life, their sense of service, and almost their sense of pride in their cultural backgrounds and stuff like that. What was your experience of working with them?
I think it's worth reminding some of your listeners, Pete, who probably don't know, that Gurkhas have served the British Army for 200 years, right?
Yeah.
1815, I think, some Gurkhas serving with the East India Company. By the time I was a very young officer, I was in Hong Kong. I'd been sent to serve with the Gurkha Transport Regiment to do one of the most amazing jobs. I was just privileged to command armoured personnel carrier troop in Hong Kong for public order purposes, training. So I had 15 Saracen armoured personnel carriers, troop of 30 Gurkhas, physical training every morning, misbehaving every evening. Everything about it was brilliant. But the Gurkha soldiers I had, life, especially then, back in Nepal, Pete, was extraordinarily tough. And there were thousands more young men, and it was men only at the time, who wanted to be Gurkha soldiers than there were vacancies. So if you had vacancies for 300, it wouldn't be unusual to have 6,000-7,000 people apply. So therefore you could set the bar quite high. Physical perfection, good health, good standard of education, and things like that. But to put it into context for you, certainly back in 1980, if a family got one boy into the British Army, as opposed to the Indian Army or the Nepalese Army, there were the three countries had a tripartite agreement. But if you could get a son into the British Army, the financial future of the entire family was secure. Such was the value of that service. And in those days, we didn't pay the soldiers anything like as much, and the pension wasn't anywhere near as good, but it was still super worthwhile. So, and they were in it for the long term. So in the British Army, we worry about retention, not with Gurkhas. Effectively, you have to prise their fingers off of their service and send them on pension, basically. So life is tough at home, and they want to stay forever, and they are incredibly loyal, incredibly dedicated, and almost no amount of hardship is too much.
Really?
And hopefully leaders wouldn't take advantage of that. But it'd be quite easy to irritate a bunch of British soldiers by asking them to do some really demanding stuff in the humping rain for days on end. So soldiers very funny, but they soon get a bit fed up and whinge a bit. You don't get Gurkhas. You don't get Gurkhas whinging. Very little admin problems, very little disciplinary troubles, and they are just a privilege to lead. Now, back in the day, I learned the Gurkhali language. I wasn't very good at it, but I had sort of colloquial language. And the English language of the soldiers was pretty good, but these days is way, 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 way better. But you had to be very careful if you gave a soldier a job to do, because he would try to execute that task quite literally, right? Quite literally.
Okay.
So you had to be very careful with your language, what you're asking a soldier to do. I'll give you one tiny little slightly humorous example. I was in the transport office and one of the Gurkha officers came in looking for one to speak to the British transport senior NCO, and the soldiers were known by their last 4 army numbers, and he said, "Staff, Guji, where is 2232?" And he said, "Oh, I haven't got him out today." No, he's missing from Friday. And on Friday, we had sent this soldier, and he was told to go to Shamshi-Po Pier and wait for Major Smith coming across from Stonecutters Island. And the guy didn't turn up. And they went down and they found him there about 4 days later, right?
Good Lord.
But of course, in the soldier's mind, journeys in Nepal take days and days and days. So it wouldn't have been an unusual thing. But he was told. So a British soldier would have gone down there, waited till 2 o'clock and come back and said, "He never turned up, boss," right? But this young Gurkha soldier, fairly inexperienced, went there. I was told to go and wait for Major X. And so he waited.
Night and day camp and just personal admin. Fascinating level of personal accountability with people such as that, though. Why, you mentioned about retention then.
Yeah.
Why do you think that has it even changed? Was retention a problem when you joined, or has it become an emerging problem towards the end of your career?
I think retention has always been a problem, and some people join the army for a relatively short period of time, Pete, and almost to get it out of their system, right?
That's been my experience. I know a lot of people that have done 5 or 7 years.
Yeah, and for some of them, it's a deliberate plan. Join the army, perhaps as a soldier, get a trade, do it for 5, 6, 7 years, get onto the junior level of the hierarchy, get some great skills, but then go off and start your second career. And certainly a lot of officers might join for a relatively short period of time, and it's a positive accelerating factor for their second career. It's deemed to have been great training at one of the best academies.
Oh, definitely. It's really active recruitment for post-military. They're ready, they're conditioned. It's almost like they have these preset ingrained behaviours, which makes them incredibly reliable, resourceful, assertive, well presented, polite, hard-working, resilient individuals, aren't they? So there is a lot of active recruitment for people leaving the military.
They're going to turn up on time. They're going to do the job or die trying. I mean, one of the trickiest things for me when I left the army after 36 years and went to work for a fairly significant organisation as the vice president of a defence and government services organisation was some of the people who were working with me for me. I struggled a bit when they wouldn't do what I told them, and it's not that the army is such a hierarchy where I've got a bigger badge than you, therefore you do as I tell you, right? So you don't inspire soldiers to do extraordinary things by just giving them orders. They have to trust you. They're all professional people. They're all volunteers. They have to trust you that what you're asking them to do makes sense. But there is I might very casually say to you, Pete, look, I need you to do this, and I need you to crack that by Tuesday. It's come across in a very chatty way, but you understand it's an order, right? You know it's something that's got to be done. And when you nod your head and say, yes, boss, I know you're going to do it or die trying. Or if you can't do it, you're going to come back fairly early on and go, hey, boss, that thing had to be done by Tuesday. For this and this reasons, it can't be done by Wednesday, but drop dead sure it'll be done by Wednesday lunchtime. Is that okay? Yeah, we agree that. But one of the problems I found is people would agree to do stuff and then not do it. And that I found quite tricky. So certainly people who leave defence, all three services, can become super valuable employees. And I'm working right now for a company called Mace, a big construction organisation who've got a big defence wing. They have an almost insatiable appetite for ex-military people. They become, the hierarchy said, I don't really mind if they don't understand construction per se, but they're great with people. They are great project managers. They know how to get things done. They don't sort of buckle if things get a bit difficult. So I think there's a lot of people who will, when they leave, they often undersell themselves as they're leaving, but they have got so much to offer the second career. So some people join with a view to doing a relatively short period of time and going. Some people join, they're not sure where they're going to leave. But I think I alluded to it before, Pete, in relation to families, right? We only serve because our partners allow us to serve, right? And it would be the same in the police and the fire service. The moment...
I think it's harder in the military than the army because that geographical aspect to it. They are living through you. They pick up, well, if they work at all, which is fine if they don't, of course, but they pick up jobs wherever they are. It's limiting for them to build a career alongside what the serving individual does.
Yeah, and the army in particular is trying to do a bit more about that and leaving people in areas for longer and all the rest of it. But even if it wasn't for the geography, it is still quite tough with people going away on exercises and operational tours and all the rest of it. So all of those things mean that some people do leave before they might otherwise naturally go. And so retention is a constant problem. Now, funnily enough, recruiting is a bit of a problem too at the very junior end, because actually we don't pay very junior people very much. And if on your way to the Army Careers Information Office, you jump onto a bus that says, drive this bus for X £1,000 a year, and it's £5,000 more than the job that you might have got when you got to the Army Careers Information Office. But if we get people and we treat them well, and we grow them, and we invest in their continuous professional development, and we give them education and courses and opportunity and travel, then some of them, like me, will stay forever. I didn't stop enjoying it. I didn't stop enjoying it, so I didn't leave, I didn't have one sleepless night in my 36 years service. I had many sleepless nights when I was messed about and woken up, but I didn't have a sleepless night in terms of worrying. I had more sleepless nights working in the commercial world when I left, when I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning worrying about the profit and loss account for the business or this, that, or the next thing. And even if you're going to do something really difficult tomorrow in some scabby part of the world, you're going to be doing it with good people in defence. And so even the darkest things I had to do I was surrounded by amazing people.
You referenced there this aspect of continual professional development. Now, I know
Yeah.
that's a commonly coined term in sectors, but I found that the military are very, very good at consistently pushing people to develop themselves, either through the vertical channels and getting promoted, or whether that's laterally. There seems an expectation, and there is, I believe there's even, is it something like if you don't get promoted in 7 years or 3 years, I forget, is that a rule still, where if you don't advance in a certain time period, it's a real problem, or it goes against you in some capacity?
I think the expression is up or out, right? Which is what I think you were talking about. There's a lot of latitude. Some people are very happy to be at the doing end of the army, right? So you'll have firefighter mates, Pete, who had no desire whatsoever to be a crew manager, right? Yeah. They wanted to go in every morning, or at beginning of every shift, do what they've got to do, climb on the truck, go and do it. And had no desire to be leading others. So,
and that's fine to an extent.
Yeah.
But you do need people to grow and develop and take up these ranks, and it is something, in my limited understanding, well, from my personal experiences across the UK Fire and Rescue Service, we're especially struggling with. But we do seem to keep saying these things like, you can join as a firefighter and be a firefighter all your career. Yes, okay, but we do need to develop people still.
Yeah. And look, and I think the Army, Defence, Army, Navy and Air Force, they are pretty good at this. For a start, everybody knows what's required to get to the next rank. And really, unlike the fire service, there's a number of little steps in the rank. You can go from private soldier to W1 RSM as a soldier. That's 7 different ranks, right?
Really?
And so... and each time you're getting more responsibility and all the rest of it. But you know what's required to get to the next level. It could be an educational requirement. It could be some course training requirement. It could be a combination of excellent reports or something like that. So everybody knows what it is that they're required to do. And then there are so many intriguing specialisms in defence. My own corps, which is the Royal Logistic Corps, where I ended up as the director of the Royal Logistic Corps. We had 17 different trades. There were so many things you could do. And do you know what? If you weren't happy being a driver, Pete, we could change you over to be a movement controller or a petroleum operator or a seaman or something like that.
Isn't that a luxury of the sheer size of the organisation as well, though?
Yeah, it is. But even within your specialism, there's always other courses to do, which keep you interested, but also then inside your unit, then you've got a specialist in water duties or whatever it is. So I think the professional development, one of the trickiest things for us is education, to be honest, Pete, and you would be surprised at the number of folk who join the army at the very junior end, whose literacy and numeracy age is as low as it is. So we end up effectively giving them a lot of basic skills and key skills, and giving them an education that they hadn't managed to attain in the state education system. Maybe their fault, maybe not, but. And I wasn't academically very good at school, but when I joined the army, I knew exactly why the army wanted me to do something. So I never failed. I'd be embarrassed to tell you how poorly my O-levels and A-levels went, Pete, but I'm very happy to tell you that every exam the army ever asked me to do, every educational challenge, I rose to, because I always understood why the army wanted me to do it. Okay. So we give people skills, and then they're skills for life too. Right? I think we've got a culture in defence, which is where when you're ready for the next step up, we've got a bigger job for you, which requires, more skills. I underachieved at school massively. I think I mentioned in my bio, Christopher excels at everything not on the curriculum, right?
Yes, I like that bit.
But then when I went to staff college as an instructor, as a baby lieutenant colonel, right? I was marking, and there was a master's program for the students, and I was marking one of the dissertations one day, and I'd said to the professional educational, the university staff, King's College doctors, Major so-and-so, I thought that was rubbish. And they said, oh no, we thought that had academic merit. I said, well, if that's the standard, I can write stuff as poor as that. So, put me down for the course. So, I got my master's degree when I was, 38 years old. But I think defence is always pushing you to do that. And so much so, even when you leave, then you don't stop. You've got to find something extra to do. You've got to tackle something, new and fresh. So I've recently become an independent custody visitor for Avon and Somerset Police and Crime Commissioner, right? So it's a voluntary role. Really happy to do it, but I've got to understand the PACE regulations and rules around that, and understand because I'm a believer in the system. Why it's important to have independent people checking on that. But if you like, that's because it's in my DNA, right?
Have you ever found that's exhausting for the people around you, though? Because this is something I struggle with at times. And again, it's surrounding yourself with like-minded people, but they are not as prevalent in general population. And I've found that very difficult, in total honesty, at times.
Yeah, I guess. You might be right. But in the fire service, the DNA strain that runs through you all is pretty similar, right? You wouldn't be in it unless you understood what was required, and you're there to team before self, go and serve, and take care of the public, and to do so you need to be professionally on top of your game, and if you were the weakest member of your crew, you'd feel it, Pete, before somebody told you about it. You'd know, so you would strive to be better.
How did you change, if at all, your approach to development, recruitment, and leadership when you were responsible for such a large, part of our British Army?
I mean, I think first of all, just dealing with the numbers. So, back in 1993, the British Army took 5 different organisations that were quite chunky in their own right and smashed them into one big corps, right? And so the Royal Logistic Corps, sometimes known as the really large corps, was a significant, and still is, a significant organisation. At one stage, when I was the father of it, if you like, the dad of the corps, it was about 16,000 regulars and about 5,000 reserves. So it's a huge organisation, and all of those people in it are being commanded by other people, right? So I wasn't standing up and commanding these people operationally, but I was responsible for how we were going to recruit them, basically the doctrine of what we, logistic doctrine, how we were going to equip them, how we were going to train them, and then inside the organisation, how we were going to pick the best people for the next generation of leaders at every rank. I had loads of people helping me do it, and it was, again, one of those rare privileges. Now, every job I did in the army, probably like you in the fire service, Pete, I got a little bit of imposter syndrome on day one, and at the beginning of everything, you think,
relate.
Okay, look, I've got away with this up until now, but this job looks really quite crunchy.
This one's a bit spicy.
Yeah, this one looks like it's going to be a bit tricky. I hope I'm going to be all right. And then actually, you have to trust that the people who selected you knew that you were going to be okay. You're going to have fabulous people working for you, as I say, standing on the shoulders of giants type stuff. And it's actually not too tricky at all. So what I wanted to do was to spend time in particular, because it's all about the people, right? Clearly we're going to have very clever people working out how we're going to train a Class 3 petroleum operator or whatever. But getting the bit that I spent a lot of time doing was in the selection of the next generation of leaders at every rank, and then spending time with them and if you like, giving a bit of them some of Chris Murray's philosophy about leadership and how they might take some of those snips of that into their command. Because if we get the command and the leadership bit right, the rest of it works out pretty well.
That's my greatest concern in, as I alluded to earlier, the way that we are hurrying people through their careers to these senior levels because we need somebody to do the job. And these people are retiring, so people are jumping ranks very, very quickly now. When you see people leave the military, and we talk about that mindset versus skill set, you can teach people anything. You know, if you give them 6 to 9 months or even a year, you can teach most switched on people to operate proficiently at a lot of roles. But harnessing and developing that mindset of a leader, especially in your command presence as well, and the way that you command people and get people on board, because like you said earlier, you don't really have, shouting and bawling at people and forcing people to do stuff it's got a very short shelf life. You almost have to inspire and motivate that desire within them versus asserting it upon them.
We could almost bring some people who had served in the army into an organisation at a relatively more senior position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because an awful lot of their skills and experience and leadership is highly valuable, right? So, last Monday, one of the officers who worked for me, who had then worked again in the same civilian company that I was in, was offered a job and has just started as the managing director of the Cardiff bus company.
Okay.
He knows nothing about buses, right? It really doesn't matter. He will absolutely smash it, right? Because he will cut around that company. He will meet every single person in it in no time at all. He'll chat to bus drivers, he'll chat to people who are servicing buses, he'll chat to the marketing people, he will go and engage with the council, he will go and engage with stakeholders, and I am absolutely convinced he will be a roaring success. As I say, what he knows about buses right now, not so big, but he will know pretty much everything about them in no time at all. Actually, when I left the army, I applied to be the Chief Fire Officer for Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service.
Did you know?
And I got into the final 3, which amazed me, and I was really excited about it. And they...
You should still go for it again now. I think you're still young enough. Mate, I'm genuinely blowing smoke up your ass, but I'm like... I want us to have those mentors that I feel are a safe pair of hands, and that's why, even after a few minutes with you when I met you, I think, God, this is someone I would like to spend more time with. I'd like some of this to rub off on me, as selfish as that sounds.
But my thinking at the time, Pete, was, look, I think Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, fabulous organisation, probably about 600 folk. So if you like, nothing like the biggest command and leadership challenge I'd ever had, or indeed, fiscally. And I reckon I would have made a really good titular head of it. I'd have been a good chief exec of it. I would have done all. I'm sure I could have done all sorts of things to make it a good organisation. But what I wouldn't have been very good at would have been clearly I wouldn't have been quite rightly allowed anywhere near the fire ground, because I think I'd have been okay at the strategic resources level in a gold command in a resilience scenario. Having done that in the West Midlands when I was brigade commander. But clearly the leaders who go out there wearing a white helmet on a tricky fire ground, everyone's got to believe that they know what they're doing. So in many respects in your business, if I may, almost the trickiest thing is to take somebody in as a grad and drop them in at that sort of station command level, because the boys and girls who have to go and do it really do want to be assured that that the boss really does understand the business. And hitherto, you couldn't have been in that position unless you had earned your spurs at the junior level. Now, as I say, that doesn't mean to say that a fast-track police officer ends up as an inspector, couldn't make a perfectly good leader of a relief. He or she, a bit like army officers, would have a number of deficiencies, and they would look to their senior NCOs or sergeants or crew chiefs or whatever, in your organisation, for some of that, whilst they're gaining that experience. In the military, you could do all sorts of things in your second career and add value, providing you don't run away with the thought that you know everything there is, in my case, say, to know about firefighting. I know about people.
I've said that, I'm more interested in the people than I am in the thing.
Yeah.
Which people find hard to believe, given I'm so publicly put myself out there as fire service person. But really, I'm secretly very fascinated with human behaviour, and that's why I like to speak to individuals from other sectors as to where they've demonstrated it so proficiently. You seem to have a very obvious calmness about you. So when I speak to a lot of people, as I'm sure we all do, but I interview a lot of people, if we call it interviewing. And, you said something earlier about 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you speak. Some people fear silence. And they say wise men speak when they've got something to say, and fools speak just to say something, just to fill the void.
Yeah.
And I have been guilty of it, and sometimes when I'm in conversations with somebody like yourself, I can begin to bloody waffle, which I'm sure I've already done at times during our conversation today. How have you developed that self-confidence, that self-awareness? Has it come with age, or is there any? I suppose I'm trying to tease advice as to how you can feel comfortable in not just chaos, but in uncertainty as well, because that's really is command and leadership, really.
I think the reason I'm pretty good at it now is that I've been in a bunch of sort of awkward, difficult moments, and then you learn something from all of those. I remember one day, one of the young captains who worked for me when I was commanding my regiment of 600 folk, he said, "Colonel, something terrible's happened." And I said, "Mark, is anybody dead?" He said, "No, sir." I said, "It's not that terrible, right?" So, if on the scale of things that go wrong, you are burying your mates, then most of the other things are fixable, right? They're fixable. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing about, at a very young age, I was trained and then put up in front of soldiers, and I almost right back to one of the first things that we talked about, Pete. They've got to believe in you. Might not matter today, so I've got to get to know them. I spend a lot of time talking to people, understanding them, understanding their family situation, understanding what makes them tick, because the next time we're chatting, I might be asking them to do something really difficult. And so they have to trust in you, and they're not going to trust in you if you are flapping about something, right? They want to be reassured that the boss has got it. And I've been in all sorts of extraordinary moments where I've just had to quietly tell myself, you better just take 3 or 4 seconds here, take a deep breath, and what you say now is really important. There's a lot of people listening, and you need to come across calm, measured, and that you've got a plan, even if you need to scurry a bit behind the scenes a bit later.
Well, it's the old duck analogy, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's like under the water, clean and what is it called? Graceful like a duck, but under the water, paddle like fog. You know what I mean? It's that busyness, but being able to deliver that when it matters. But I think the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So it is easy for people to catastrophize over things because they don't have the same spectrum as you, and neither do I. Yes, I've been to incidents, and I've never, luckily, had a colleague pass operationally, but I've seen many people lost at incidents, and that widens your spectrum for better or worse. I think for better, but only insofar as it allows you to get a realistic appraisal of the seriousness and severity of other situations. But for many people, they won't have had this exposure. For God's sake, you were saying when you were 19, you're in charge of 45 grown men or whatever it was, that is unspoken, that is unheard of today. So, I mean, it probably still happens in the military, I don't know. But there's this strange correlation that age comes with wisdom and responsibility. Not always the case. We know many old fools. But it is an expectation that perhaps that is a correlation. But people don't necessarily have those same exposures. So for people that are very inexperienced, and again, I allude to these direct entry individuals, the worst things that have happened to them is the worst things that have happened to them. So you don't want to see your leaders flapping and catastrophizing because you can lose faith in them, can't you?
It also helps if you can diffuse a difficult situation with a bit of humour. It also, I think the Army, the police service, the fire service, we've woven quite a bit of black humour into our lives, because actually sometimes that's the only way we can cope.
I think it's essential.
Yeah.
And I think it builds so much healthy culture. I know it's given quite a bad rap these days, and people are actively trying to remove it with a rusty spoon from our cultures. And of course there is some unwanted results of encouraging that behaviour, but I think the pros outweigh the cons.
Oh yeah, look, no question about it. I mean, I joined an army in 1974 that was significantly racist, homophobic, misogynist. No question about it. And actually, it was illegal to be gay in the British Army then.
Was it really? Oh God, yeah. Jesus.
Oh no, and or through into
I can remember that.
Through into the 90s, right? Through into the 90s. But it's changed. But there's still space in the military for like irreverent humour, and leaders also have to be happy to be a bit self-effacing or take a bit of humour and knock. And I find the best thing for me to do normally is to I get there before them, so I take
a little bit self-deprecating.
I take the mick out of myself, and then we're halfway there. But the other bit then is if you are standing up and you want people to to have faith and believe in you or whatever, then you better believe in the thing yourself, right? So you had better be I was at my best public speaking to hundreds of people about the thing I was the most passionate about, which was my cap badge, my corps, my people. I could stand up there without a note in my hands with a few pictures and tell stories about the extraordinary things that were happening in logistics right then, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and being exceptionally proud and being an ambassador for those people was one of my greatest privileges. And we we are bloody good at it, and it took Mr. Putin to demonstrate that if you don't get that right, you are going to suffer. If you've got a 40-mile queue of armoured vehicles, Pete, that need fuel, and if your soldiers are ransacking shops to eat, you haven't got your basic logistics right?
I want to go deeper just a little bit for a second there, because you've alluded to something that is very emotive for me and it's a bugbear of mine. Pride. They say pride comes for a fall. I think there is something about the Western world. We are unnecessarily self-deprecating. I think there's been a shift in the last 20 years or so against nationalism and being proud of how good we are at what we do. That's one thing I love about people in the military, and most of the time people in public services, although it's not always the case. I think the Americans tend to look better at it, as in they seem prouder of their military and their first responders than we are. I don't know why that is. I wanted you to try and act as the salesman for me, if you will, and just try and help encourage why healthy ego is good, self-pride, confidence, the ability and comfort to stand in front of hundreds of people, like you say, and espouse and feel proud of the values of the thing that you're part of. Because I think we're so easy to slate things and slag each other off and say that we shouldn't be overly proud of ourselves in the UK, and that really bothers me. I think it will come to the overall detriment of our society, and has done. Because you have children, and this is a point I have on my list that I wanted to ask if you're comfortable to go there, because it's something I try and encourage heavily in my children. And in fact, I'll ask you about children in a minute, but please go there first.
Pride is absolutely fine. And is required, providing the thing that you're being proud about is truly good, right? So okay. I think the reason I was able to stand up and be so compelling about the men and women of the Royal Logistic Corps and the things that they were doing is because, first of all, we collectively were doing some amazing things, and it is a bit special, right? This isn't. There are some very highly respected logistic companies who drive yellow or green or blue trucks around the United Kingdom, and they're all very good at what they do and are probably as professional logisticians better than us. But none of them can do it at the violent end of the supply chain. And do it in the way we do it across the spread of the things that we do. So I was I'm particularly proud because it's a great story to tell. It's a great story to tell, and oh, by the way, I can tell it, right? I can bring this to life with a picture, either of a soldier or something that's happening, and tell you what is happening. People, when I was a boy, everybody knew somebody who had served in the military or national service, World War II or whatever. Right now, we could stop 100 people down in Chipping Salisbury High Street. Very few people would know somebody who is serving or has served. Yeah. Things have changed. The British Army is the smallest it has been for a very long time. There are more postmen than there are British Army soldiers, and Tesco's employs 4 times as many people as the British Army, right?
Wow.
So it's a small...
Should we take that as a feeling of safety, though? Or is it that we haven't diversified the role of the army and the military to continue its necessity? Or is that a reflection that we have moved more to a technological age? Or is it just we don't value it anymore? Or do you know what I'm trying? Because I think it's a tremendous shame for me personally, because of all the things we've alluded to and the societal benefit that everyone takes from having more people engaged in this type of role.
I'll try and give you a balanced response, which is
without getting too passionate. I can see the soapbox coming out.
Technological advancements mean a smaller organisation can still have massive combat capability, right? Mm-hmm. So, and some of the technological advancements have been extraordinary in terms of the weaponry, the lethality, and all that sort of stuff. All of that said, I think when the Berlin Wall came down, most governments were trying to get a peace dividend, as it were, and quite a lot of money was taken out of defence in Europe in particular, and certainly in the United Kingdom. And I think some of that has gone too far. So it's very expensive, right? It's expensive to have a professional army. It's expensive to equip them, to house them, to have technical accommodation for them. You know, it's expensive. Fire and rescue service, the kit's better. Firefighters are better protected. Technologically, you know, your intelligence is very good about what's likely to happen on your county patch or whatever.
As a result, things are safer and we've got smaller.
Yeah, and you are, you know, the best time to turn up to a fire is 2 weeks before, right? And make sure it,
yes, very much so.
Make sure it doesn't happen. So you can have fewer folk who are immaculately trained and issued with the best kit. British Army's gone a bit too far. There does come a stage where every time you have a defence assumption about what you might want the defence to do for you, it normally gets, you know, that assumption gets trashed a wee while later, and you're being asked to do 3 times as many things with the same number of folk. So I really do think that the British Army could afford to be a little larger, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But you know, we lost our ability to operate at a certain level of scale in the British Army. So if you just want to contribute to UN humanitarian missions and peacekeeping, you can be a certain sort of size and shape. If you want to go head to head with near peer adversaries and fight at a high intensive combat rate, then you had better be able to do that and sustain it and supply it and have the ammunition to fight that war too. So I'll just step back off that particular soapbox. But you know, all governments have done it, and I have a sense that if there was a little bit more money around right now, and especially because of some of the wake-up calls from Ukraine, Pete, that the government would be putting a bit more back into defence.
Is the world a safer place today?
Demonstrably no. So I think when I was a boy in the middle of the Cold War, you know, I spent a bit of time in Germany facing the inner German border. There were 2 big superpowers. Everybody else was a satellite of one or other of them. We knew exactly what we had to do, and the prospect of fighting that war was so difficult, so awful, that we mutually deterred each other from doing it. As soon as the Berlin Wall came down, within no time at all, I was serving in Bosnia, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, places like that, where, you know, the things had fragmented, and whilst the scale of those operations wasn't so large, the complexity was there, and now, of course, one is also required to fight organisations that are not states. So you have one of the things that exercises, you know, some of the military minds is how you prevail, you know, in a fight with somebody where you know, they are non-state actors, and they are using tactics that you know, we would recognise as sort of terrorism and things like that. So almost whatever. So all of your old military training about, you know, engaging with the enemy.
Rules of engagement.
Some of that has changed really quite considerably, as you are fighting people who don't recognise your rules. Right? Don't.
Would you join the military again? I don't mean right now, because you may struggle, but advice for, if you were 17 today, not knowing what you know, but advice for people who are of that age now, because we've already alluded to earlier, and I want to be respectful of your time, so this will be one of the final questions. It is tough to recruit people into all frontline services now, in total honesty. The choices are much more widespread. The options for people to do things professionally, there's many, many more options. So we do have to continue to sell ourselves. Would you, if you were a child, rejoin the military now? Would you do it? Would you encourage other people to do it? What's the benefit today?
In a heartbeat, I think, is the expression. The army now is different from the army I joined, but there are so many things about those two different versions of the British Army that are still good. And hey, look, I left the army 13 years ago, but I'm still Colonel Commandant of the Royal Logistic Corps, so I'm like the godfather, one of the godfathers of the Corps, and I meet the next generation of baby lieutenants, and I chat to them, and they are every bit as good. They're better than I was then, and I used to recruit them into my corps at Sandhurst. And I'd look around sometimes after the interview, and I think, I wouldn't let me in now, right? So these youngsters are so good, I wouldn't let me in. So I think
the bar's been raised.
I think I would join again. It is still an honourable profession, Pete. There is a higher calling. Soldiers, sailors and airmen in it still deserve to be led by extraordinary people. I think we are still a robust organisation, but in some ways it's a more of a thinking organisation. It's a kind of organisation. I think we take better care of people now, but there's a really important job to be done. And it's a slightly different job. And so some of these young lieutenants that I'm talking to, and second lieutenants, I was chatting to one recently, just extraordinary moment where I met this young female second lieutenant. She's just about to join my corps, our corps. I said, "Why did you join?" She said, "My mum was in the corps." I asked her who her mum was, and this woman, Carol, had been my squadron second in command when I was a young major in Germany in 1990, right? So we had an immediate connection. But this young second lieutenant is fit, bright, smart. She will lead small numbers of determined men and women to do really challenging things on the four corners of this planet. And she will have great fun doing it. And along the way, we'll give her skills for life and for her second career. Everyone's got to leave eventually, so but we will equip her well for that. And she will have enormous fun. And I would do it again, for sure.
Chris, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I really, really appreciate that. I had a list of things that I wanted to cover with you, and I feel like we've gone down and fully explored so many rabbit holes, including others that I didn't have on my list. So thank you for your generosity of your time. I appreciate you are still a busy man, and this is time away from your family and your grandchildren and your partner. She's probably sick of you being pulled away to do important international work, and this certainly doesn't meet that caliber. So thank you for your generosity today.
Well, it's been a real pleasure sharing things with you, Pete, and I hope a couple of things I said about my wife make the edit, because she'll listen to this later, and she'll otherwise she'll give me a tweak.
Behind every man there's a strong woman telling him how to live his life properly, isn't there? Wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
Bless you, mate. Thank you very much indeed.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.